Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the YouTube Model Builders Hangouts for May 31st, the day after Memorial Day of 2016. Tonight, we will be having the Barry and Mike's Model Railroad Tech Show, our live hangout presentation, and it'll be me, myself, Mike, and it'll be Chris Healy, and there will also be Andy Crawford joining us. Tonight's topic will be discussing prototypical signals as applies to the real railroad, not to the model railroad. Now, the whole idea is to show everybody why real railroads use signals, and then in future we're going to develop a layout design that will allow us to show you how to apply the theory and put signals on the model railroad. So that's coming up in a future episode. And don't everybody forget, YouTube Model Builders is your source for free model railroad resources. We have our wonderful free online e-magazine that JD and the team put together. We have fantastic last couple of issues. We have our live chat presentation hangouts that we do every other Tuesday and every Thursday. And we have our once a month live show, which now officially has been on the air for 2 years. So the last show was our second anniversary. So it's been going strong and only going stronger. So we'll have a lot of new stuff coming out over the summer into the fall. Mike and I will be working more on the JMRI stuff with Chris and Andy. And we're going to foray a little bit down the road into doing some craftsman modeling stuff as well, take it a little bit off the tech path. So I hope everybody enjoys that when it comes around. So, prototype signaling. I mean, why do the railroads use signals? What's their purpose? Where would you put them on a real railroad? To start with, signals are all about protecting trains from, hazards and from each other. So you protect the siding, you protect the main line, etc. But it's all about protection. Now, some signals are about protecting the public, such as grade crossing signals. That's something that was typically never discussed when we discussed signals before. So always remember that your grade crossing signals are a great source of animation and sound for your layout, but they're a necessity, when you have roads on your layout that protect not only the train from the traffic from the train, and the people as well. So, Chris, have you ever done anything with signaling on your layout at all? Or you, Andy?
I've only done it on JMRI to practice. I don't have any live signals on my layout, but I did about a year ago practice setting up a whole layout panel with operating signals, kind of looked into how they work.
Now, do you have detection to go along with that?
Well, that's why I don't have the signals yet, because I don't have the detection yet either. So.
My layout was fully signaled years ago using Circuitron block detectors on a DC layout. So I had a DC layout, but it was fully signaled. Stall motor, not tortoise, but stall motor with a little worm gear, slow motion machines. 15 years ago or 16 years ago. So and that was with rotary block control on a panel, because that was, DCC was extremely cutting edge at the time, and I'd only seen it a little bit at a trade show. It wasn't mainstream. So now I'm taking all the things I understood about doing it the hard way, and that is the hard way, unquestionably. And I think signals are one of the ways that DCC and JMRI really start to shine, because of how low the complexity is to do something like that. And back then, I had a degree in electrical engineering, and you basically needed it to do it on DC.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there.
But it worked. It worked on DC, and on DCC, you're getting the same result. It just requires a lot less wire.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you, Andy. What we've discussed before, we'll go over a little bit here, but obviously signaling, you have your aspects of your signals which determine, train movement. So you'll have like your medium approach, your approach signal, your stop signal, your clear signal, and different railroads use different approaches. So if you're interested in prototype signaling, it would, behoove you to research how the railroad you're modeling is, was functioning with their signaling system.
And these days, that's become pretty standardized, cut and dry way of doing it across a bunch of railroads. But back, if you model anything historic, they varied greatly. The aspects were different.
Yes.
How they functioned were different. So, I mean, there's a lot of diversity if you go back prior, say, I don't know, prior to the 70s. There's a lot of diversity. This day and age, there was, up until here very recently, still some of those old signals in place. But over the last, say, decade or so, they've really standardized around I think they're called Type Ds, that I call traffic light style signals. That's become really, really standardized. But you used to see Type Gs and position light and color position light and even semaphores. I think the SP used semaphores up into the 80s at least, right?
Really? Wow.
Yeah, Montana Railing just in the last couple of years got rid of their last one, semaphores.
Yep. So all those things, that's something I mentioned in the EMAG article I wrote, is that you really can show a lot of history for your railroad by incorporating some of those antiquated signal systems that were still in place, like the ball signals, the old pole and a volleyball painted orange. Those were
Mike and I just picked up some signals like that from Portland Locomotive Works. I got an O scale set for Mike and an S scale of ball signals for our railroads, and it's really an interesting design he did.
They're beautiful.
3D printed parts. Gary Kohler does some nice work.
And they were beautiful. And they used them for over 100 years.
Yeah. Now it's funny you mentioned about how signals have changed, become more standardized. Up in our territory here in the Northeast corridor of Norfolk Southern Amtrak, they still use position lights. Most of it's color, but on occasion you can still see an old non-colored Pennsy position light working.
Oh yeah, I mean it's funny on the main line. It's Amtrak has all sorts of crap there on their main line. They'll have position, color position, and target lights all in the same little stretch.
They inherited so much from so many railroads, Amtrak and anything that's part of the coal roads that became the Penn Central, really inherited so much diversity. I mean, the Norfolk Southern has, and I'm an old N&W modeling, but they developed, they inherited some diversity. But I think Penn Central is the epitome of diversity.
Mike, he said the evil abomination word.
Ew, don't say the PC word. Ew.
I know that's faux pas.
That is
don't
the
make
abomination.
me Virginian.
There you go. That's better.
I call it the coal roads, the old Lehigh Valley, and they're all those roads were incredibly interesting. So pulling them under one herald should have been interesting, but it's not.
Now, so let's talk about some different kinds of places on the railroad where you would have signals. Obviously, we just discussed the Northeast Corridor with Amtrak and Norfolk Southern. On there, most of the signal controls are to protect trains from one another as they're traveling on the same track. So in a typical 3-aspect system, which is the quote prototype system that any modeler can build, you have your red stop aspect, your yellow approach aspect, and your green clear aspect. So the moment a train enters a block, the prior block would become red for stop, so the train approaching from the rear would know there's a train in the block ahead. One block behind that, you would have the approach, which typically is a speed restriction, and then block before that, you would have your clear or green, and that will be, the locomotive will be allowed to travel at the rated speed for that territory. And this is typically used in congested areas of operation when there's multiple trains running on single tracks. But they can also be used in areas where they represent what the position of your turnout is coming up, how fast you're allowed to approach a turnout. Is the main clear ahead? Is the turnout set and cleared at the siding? There you'll get into multiple signals in one spot. So a single signal, and correct me if I'm wrong, Andy, is called a mast. And on top you have your heads. So if you're approaching, say, a siding and you want to signal the occupancy of the siding and the occupancy of the main, you would have two masts or a single mast with dual arms with multiple heads, one for the siding and one for the main line. Or Pensy, you could have multiple heads on a single mast because they had more than three aspects. They had approach, medium approach, various other aspects that control the speed by signal restriction versus territory. So it's a little bit different for Pensy, and that's why I said, you know, if you want to do prototype, study your prototype.
And a lot of railroads had very complicated systems, but across the board, a single mast has four potential positions. But I'm not sure the Pensy, but the B&O, for example, could have 26 different indicators.
Yeah.
A single two-aspect mast. So there's a lot of diversity, but there's four standards.
So what are the four standards?
Approach clear, restricted, diverging route, and stop. Also.
Right.
That's the four standard.
Right, so the diverging route indicate when you're taking the route into, say, a siding or off to another branch or something like that. That would signal the condition of the diverging route, whether it's set or thrown or clear, I mean. So those, if you model those four on a model railroad, that's as basic of a signal system as you need. And you can, the aspect of being the diverging or not can be done with two separate signal masts or a single mast with multiple heads to set that fourth aspect. So there can be, that can simply be controlled by the position of your turnout using a relay or, you know, contacts on your points to set that aspect. Now, when you're in bi-directional territory, everything gets more complicated because now you have both directions of travel, so the block needs to know which direction the train's coming from. Is there a train in the block ahead? Because you could get two opposing stop signals saying there's a train here. You do a stop in the rear and stop in the rear in the opposite direction as well. So it gets a little more complicated with how the railroads detect those territories. It's typically only smaller railroads do that kind of operation, though.
Yeah, and there's typically two different types of, if you see a signal, you're driving down the road and on the tracks beside of you, there's a signal tower in there. There's typically two types of signal indicator towers, and those signals for that can be different. One of those is a control point, a CP, and that's at a turnout, at an interchange, at a crossover. And then there is the mid-block signals. The different railroads call them a lot of different things, but they're in the middle of a block, and they're meant to tell you ahead of time what the next signal is going to say, so you can start adjusting speed. You know, these are not automobiles where you can stop on a dime. We need some time to adjust. Typically, a control point signal has a number on the mast to tell you the location of that by a number, 2 or 3 or 4 digits. And the mid-block signals are typically not numbered.
Because the numbers on the signals would be actually the identification of the control point, correct?
Yep. Typically. Again, there's variability, but typically you may have 3 masts facing in different directions, and they would have the same number and have A, B, and C sometimes, or they would just have the same number on them. But.
Well, if anybody read Railroad Model Craftsman, starting in December of last year, Bruce Chubb, the creator of the CMRI signaling detection system, that a lot of people know and love, began writing articles every month on strictly prototype signaling. He is now up to what, the June issue is almost out, and they're up. He's got like 6 or 7 articles published on just prototype signals. It's so much information to digest, and I haven't read the last few to see if he's getting into prototype signals for different railroads or not. But he has mentioned some of the different things, like this aspect might be at like a Type 276 on a Pensy or on the Norfolk and Western. So you have to definitely, if you haven't read them, see if you can get those issues. I subscribed when I was up in Amherst in January, and I picked up the back issues. And it's fascinating reading to understand how signaling works on a real railroad.
And I'll tell you, one of the things that really fascinates me, if you get into this and have any respect, I think most of us in the railroad modeling space of any kind have a lot of respect for mechanization and the way things function and understanding, and the fact that in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they figured out how to control signals halfway around the United States remotely with telegraph systems and stuff. It's just a good, fascinating read.
Oh, absolutely.
The modeling of them, just how they did that, and they were using battery technology over 100 years ago. We're just now, mainstream battery users only come around with the advent of the smartphone and the laptop, and they were battery powered signal systems for over 100 years.
If you ever look at an old signal, you might see like a round well in the ground with like, looks like a manhole cover over it. That's like the battery box that would power that signal.
Yep.
They were like giant car battery style systems in there. And like Andy said, it's all relays and electromechanical wiring. No fancy solid state electronics. Somebody flip a switch on a CTC panel, and it triggered a series of relays and sent the signal. And like he said, for distances, they'd send it over telegraph, and it would trigger another relay, which then would fire off the signal. So that's in the manual, like in manual territory, where all the signals.
That came around in the late 1800s. We didn't have that same technology in the mainstream phone system until the late 1930s. It took more than 30 or 40 years before even the phone system adopted it. We normally consider that ancient technology, and the railroad was doing it nearly 40 years before, when most people didn't have indoor wiring.
Yeah, you're right.
So take that into account when you're thinking about signaling your railroad for 2 reasons. One, keep in mind how it was done, and that how simple that system fundamentally is. It feels complicated when you're trying to put it on your layout, but fundamentally it's extremely simple, number one. And number two, it's something I kind of alluded to or pushed toward in the EMAG article is, and talked about already, is signaling sets such a tone for your railroad that showing that history, and I think signal systems show history in a way that virtually no other thing on your railroad, short of maybe buildings, can do.
Well, look at it this way from another aspect too, Andy, is a fairly robust signal infrastructure adds so much character and detail to your railroad. Like I took a little walk that I shouldn't have on Saturday because I had some minor surgery on Thursday, but I just had to get my butt out of the house. I went over, it was the Richland Village Railroad Day, so the Patcon Valley Model Railroad had their open house, and there's total Digitrax environment, and they have a fully functioning Pensy position light system on their railroad. It's fascinating to look down and see the different aspects as the trains go by and how they change and everything.
And one of the few things that's animated on your railroad other than the trains, and something that I disparage a lot on the railroad, is that trains are the only thing that operate. Short of crossing gates and signals are one of the few things that you can do. There's a few people doing a lot of animation on their railroads, but 99% of model railroads out there have moving trains, and everything else is still life.
Yep, absolutely. We get a little comment from our friend Ken Pryor here. He says, no question, just want to say I really appreciate the explanations being given tonight on signals. You're answering quite a few of the questions I've had for quite a while. I'm glad. I mean, that's the whole point of this, Ken. And like I said earlier, you know, we're going to go down the road a little ways from here. The next step for us is we're going to develop a simple layout plan that has various types, like Andy mentioned, like junction points, infrastructure, you know, interchanges, crossovers, sidings, yards. And what we would do then is take this information we're presenting tonight and say, now, how would I protect that element on my model railroad? What signal infrastructure do I need from a model railroad perspective, which will, in theory, be the prototype perspective. And then once we've developed that, further down the line, we will carry in, okay, now, what do I have to do to implement this in JMRI? And what do I have to do to implement this in hardware on my actual layout? Not so much the physical signals, but the controls hardware that operates those signals. So this is going to be a drawn-out process, because obviously some of us know more than others about this, and I know I have to learn some about it. So I will be working with, you know, Mike and Andy and Chris to get this done. So it's going to be a process going on into the fall, but I think it'll be a, you know, an enjoyable process. We're not trying to jam it down everybody's throat all at once.
And also, there's some consideration that has to be taken for the fact that we're modeling it. You just can't take the prototype, uproot it, put it on your layout, because we don't have 50 miles between cities and things like that. So, and that's something Bill mentions in his comment here, talking about Bill asks about if you're limited in space on some of our layouts, what would be the simplest way to do signals on the layout? And that's definitely something we've got to talk about in the upcoming shows. But something I really want to draw attention to as we talk about this is you just can't uproot a prototype signal system and put it in, because our layouts are not Wisconsin in size.
Right.
You know, bedroom or basement, and there have to be different considerations in how they operate to make effective use of the space.
Now, see, where I see the issues, what Bill's saying is that if you are modeling a prototype, it's harder to simplify it. You can pick and choose what aspects you present. The biggest thing I would say is that, like you mentioned, is we don't have these big grand vistas where we can do, you know, 20 mid-block signals going down the main line to protect all the trains. Where you focus at is your control points, that's your interchanges, your junctions, your sidings. That's where you're going to get the bang for your buck, you know. And it's a lot simpler operation there, but at the same time, you're coming into, say, a yard on the main, you might have a fair amount of signals protecting, say, the entrance into a yard ladder or a multi-track siding. So that's where you can get a nice-looking signal system with not a ton of complexity and keep it limited in a small space and yet get the effect of it, you know.
Yeah, it just takes some, you have to kind of think about it a little different than just reading about the prototype is great and it's going to get you 90% the way there, but there's a few adjustments. For example, if you have a 15-foot long train and your signals are 10 foot apart, the train is going to span across multiple signals and blocks, and there's considerations, and we can handle that when we talk about detection and resistors on wheel sets, so all your cars are detected, some things like that. But it's still difficult on a small layout. If you have a train that's 15 feet long running across your layout, and it turns every signal on the layout red. That's
the other thing is, you're like Bill was saying, the simplicity, but if you have a really long train, your signal system has to accommodate that. So if you do have a sufficiently long stretch of main line to run a big train down, you got to remember, if you say you've got a 10-foot train and a 11-foot main line, you're not going to put a mid-block signal in the middle of that, because, like you said, it would occupy two signal blocks. The whole point of a block is enough room for one train with your signal, and yet have buffer room at the end to allow the train to stop and allow the train to be protected from the rear. So the block size between signals has to accommodate your train size. So if you want to jam in a little bit more mid-block signals, you got to adjust the size of your train based on your physical layout to achieve the effect.
Yeah, the one caveat there, Barry, is though it's the size of your average size train. So
Yes.
if you have a long train, then yeah, they're going to span 2 blocks, but typically you want the normal train and your short
Yeah.
train to be just 1 block per train.
And what
So-
you're designing for, that's the key. What you're designing for, the
Yeah.
standard.
That,
Yeah.
like Mike said, that's your target. Like there can be exceptions, but that's your target that you're trying to hit.
Yeah, my whole approach is not to take a prototype signal system and say, how can I fit it to my layout? It's to take my layout, determine the operations and how and where I need signals, and then apply the prototype practice to those situations.
Absolutely. And as much as I am a prototype modeler modeling a real place and time, I cannot take the signal system that existed on this line out of 1950 and just shove it in here, or I couldn't enjoy the operation. There has to be selective compression, and it's not just selective compression in size, but in how it functions.
Yes.
Same
Yeah,
thing's
it's
true of
actually-
yard trackage, for example. You just can't take a full-size yard and shrink it down. You need some of the facilities and some you don't. So sometimes it's selective omission.
Yeah, that's a good term, but selective omission. You're right, because I mean, obviously railroads signal their yard ladder, so locomotive engineers operating the yard know if they're approaching a turnout, which way am I going? You know, so there's where you get into dwarf signals and stuff. Now, that's one leads into this question from John Dilley here. Said, do you need a signal for all of your turnouts? No, not in real practice, because like a siding going into an industrial spur is not going to be signaled unless it's a control point where it would interface with something else. Like if it led into a branch or something like that and then spurred off, you probably wouldn't have a signal on the spur, but you would have one where it comes off the main as a branch.
And there's,
So,
like
good
everything
one-
else, it's complicated. But there's 4 ways to do a turnout. One is it's mechanized and signaled. One is that the CTC locks it and it's signaled, but you manually have to flip it over. But the dispatcher has to unlock the signal before you can flip it over. Those are really interesting operations.
Yeah.
Then there's manual signals that have the signal so that when the guy on the ground flips the turnout over, it will adjust the signal. And then sometimes there's just dark turnouts. Actually, the more turnouts in the world are probably dark than anything else.
Yeah, if they're not mainline, you know, basically if they're not mainline and control, you know, changing from track main 1 to main 2, other than like Barry said, a branch line or something, or a main passing siding, generally they're not. You know, if it's anything where a guy's going to go out and throw the switch manually for the most part, it's not. You know, a general rule of thumb would be if it's CTC, you know, it's probably signaled. If it's not CTC, it's probably not. It's not 100%
And
accurate.
think
but
about the real railroad. There's a couple considerations for the real railroad. They're about making money and not spending money. So if they don't need to put a multi-$1,000 sensor on it or a
There you go.
multi-$1,000,
That's the answer right there.
yeah,
So it's one thing cheaper than model railroad. It's a railroad.
yeah, they do not care if that guy they're paying has to climb down in the snow and flip the turnout. They don't care. That does not hurt the guys who make the decisions. That don't hurt their feelings whatsoever.
No, it
that's
does
why I
not.
love prototype model, because I can be so cheap.
Yep, think like the real railroad. If it wouldn't make you money, don't spend money on it.
That's right. Something we got to mention is that our March issue of the eMag was all about signaling. So that's another great resource for everybody to look at, prototype and model signaling. That was one of our best issues, man. JD knocked that one out of the park with his team and all the guys who wrote articles for it. So make sure you go check out the March issue. And while we're talking eMag, don't forget, everybody, to go to YouTubeModelBuilders.com over to the eMag header at the top, and you can subscribe to the eMag, as we're starting to use that now to also send out notices about the live show and such, and we're trying to expand the use of that email subscription. But now we are almost at 1,000 subscribers to get notified about things that we are doing, especially the eMag when it's published every 2 months. So go on to YouTubeModelBuilders.com and sign up, so that way we can notify and you can get the link to the eMag delivered right to your inbox, and you just click it and read it. Here we got a comment from Hawks HO. Says, can't wait for the next step. Can I send you my layout and you can plan in my signalization system and have it on your show? Well, that's not a bad thought. You know, we might only use pieces, Hawks. It depends upon how complex your layout is. What we're trying to focus on with the idea is that we will take the different elements that we've mentioned, like what Andy's mentioned, control points, your interchange, your crossovers, sidings, and give examples of as many of those things as possible in our layout plan, so that, you know, a good chunk of what you would signal would be represented when we discuss it. So if you want to send it off my way, or, you know, put a post out about it, certainly glad to take a look at it, because, you know, that might be something good to see how a planned model railroad could take advantage of this. So please feel free to send it my way.
That says something about size of layout considerations too. Your sub layouts are not conducive to certain signal systems, certain operation systems, like timetable and trade order. The common consensus in the OPSIG of the NMRA is that timetable and trade order, TT and TO, generally requires about a 300-foot main line to have the time delays necessary to implement that. So just because the prototype used a certain thing, or just because you're building a layout of a certain era, doesn't mean you can signal it in the right way due to space limitations. I mean, I have a 15 by 15 room. There has to be considerations. And we think about distance being the big limitation, but when we're talking about signal systems, time is the key differentiator. You don't have the time to react to the signals the way the prototype would, and we have to make caveats.
Yeah, and that's something to consider when you're setting your signaling up is, you know, like you said, if I'm running down the main line and I have a signal every 5 feet, if somebody in front of me pulls out of a siding and now my aspect changes, I have to be able to have time to react to that. And with keeping lives and sound decoders and everything, you got to consider there's now very natural momentum built into our DCC decoders that you have to account for. So be aware of that aspect too when you're designing your signaling system.
And I would suggest that designing a signal system, I say this a lot when it comes to designing layouts, picking scales, and all this stuff. I've said a lot about these kind of things. But it's very difficult, it is more difficult to take a layout that is already designed, built, whatever, and go back and signal it. That if you take into account those things while you're planning, if you can do that, it's going to make your life so much easier.
Right.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, but why do it the easy way?
Of course, we don't do nothing the easy way, do we?
No, I mean, we're model railroaders. That's kind of a stated fact. We have chosen a hard path in life, not occupationally, but for our hobby. Our spare time is spent doing things the hard way by choice.
That's the point. It's our hobby. And like Bill always says, we got to put the F back into hobby. Fun.
Hey, don't say that F word.
If everybody takes note in the Q&A, Newcastle Railroad, Mr. Cohen there, has posted 2 very interesting graphic links to Pensy signal aspects. So I'll see if I can share that. Show you what one of them looks like. Oh, there it is. Okay.
And the Pensies are very representative of a signal that was not common at all out west, but was very common in the east. The Pensy, my beloved N&W, the B&O, there's a tremendous number of railroads that use similar, slightly different, just slight differences, but they were very close.
Okay, let me see if I can make sure I bring this up on the screen here for everybody. There we go. So as you can see here, this is a more modern representation of the Pennsy signal system. This is from CSX. This is the CSX NORAC signal aspects, and they're indicating rules from 2004. But you notice some of these have changed to color lamps versus strictly the three yellow indications. But
Right.
as you can see, clear to next interlocking, approach at normal speed. We have a clear route. We have whatever your cab speed set to. We have your approach. There's a dozen different variations in here that you could model,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it would drive you crazy trying to do that.
It's not necessary to model every possibility. It's not necessary to model every possibility anyway. Also, something that I think is interesting, looking at that signal description and detail there, is put yourself in the shoes of an engineer. You're barreling down the track at 60 miles an hour with a mile of train behind you, and you see a signal aspect that looks a little funny to you, and you got to pull out this cheat sheet while you try to figure it out at 60 miles an hour.
Yeah, you're right.
Well, a lot of them have the signals in the cap too. And the other thing is what we see here too is you not only got the Pennsy signals there too, but the colored ones are the B&O signals. B&O.
Yes, yeah, they're very similar to the B&O aspect. So it's a combination of the CSX and Norfolk Southern kind of
And that speaks to Andy's point where basically these bigger railroads, bigger class ones now basically have a bunch of legacy equipment they have to deal with.
And they're in the process of replacing. Norfolk Southern, since 2014, has put a tremendous amount of effort in getting everything to the Type D or traffic light styles, and they're killed on those old position lights that I just think are gorgeous.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing was all the mergers over the years, as they merged, they didn't get rid of the old stuff from the railroad they bought. So, a lot of times the big class ones now have 2, 3, 4 different styles of signaling depending on where you are, what division and what the heritage was.
Yeah, they didn't change anything unless you could just paint over it for a long time. Now, at this point, they're starting to standardize around different things, but for the longest time, if you couldn't paint over it, it just stayed diverse.
Now, here's a comment from our buddy Bill, the new South Brooklyn Railroad YouTube channel. So he says, red signal with permission to key by, be prepared to stop within 1/2 feet of your vision and prepared to stop if rail is occupied or rail is broken. I'm not quite sure what he's meaning there, but it sounds like, when you're operating something like what he used to operate, like a commuter train, you got to be prepared to stop pretty quick. There could be people on the track, etc.
And I think he needs to align that comment with his previous comment about how to signal a small railroad, and this is his kind of detailed description of what he's trying to prepare us for. And most of us know the size of his layout, and it can totally be signaled, but there you would have to make some considerations given its size.
Yes, absolutely.
I think what he's talking about too, there's actually 2 different red, indications depending on what the situation, and one is an absolute stop, and one is exactly what he said. You can proceed at a speed where you can stop in 1/2 the train length of any obstruction or thing that you can see ahead of you. So it's not always an absolute stop.
Yeah, stop and proceed. So control points, if they're red, you absolutely stop. But at a mid-block signal, if it's red, you stop and proceed if safe.
You guys got to remember too that Bill was a commuter rail guy. He was like a subway driver. So their signaling system, you think that the stuff that we're playing with is complicated. The subway signals are just ridiculous.
Have you ever seen some of the interlockings like in the New York, commuter train system?
Oh, they're crazy.
Oh, yeah. I saw one time out, a photograph of one in Chicago. It just looks like someone took lines and went like that. Just like it was the same looking.
Yep, they just decided we have 12 tracks going down south and 12 tracks going north, and we want them all to connect at one place. It's awesome.
And here's our good friend Dwight Christmas. So I'm glad you're enjoying the show, Dwight. You know, we love doing this stuff for you guys. And everybody likes to understand this tech stuff, and it's good that we know we can all present it to you, and we try to present it to you in a manner that everybody can understand without going too far over the top or down Andy's rabbit holes. And Andy, I love him to death, man, but if you want to really learn something, Andy's your guy, man. He will take you down every tunnel you could possibly imagine. But when you get back to the light, you can't help but learning some good stuff. Let's see. What else we got up here? Oh, so Hawk said Bill Baronic. I'll have to check with Bill Baronic then. So we can get a copy of the train layout there, so we can take a look and see if we can possibly use that.
As long as there's not worms on the side of his diesels, we're good.
Diesels, who wants to fool with those nasty things?
That's all right. Last weekend when me and Mike were at the Narrowgate show out in Kemperton, we strictly ran all steam. We had the new V4 wow sounds, but we had to put the Korean brass U25C on the turntable for display. So that was our honorary diesel.
Diesel, that's awesome. By the way, that is a gorgeous locomotive by Korea Brass.
Oh God, yeah, I gotta get me one of them. Even though it's a little bit out of my modeling era, but
yeah,
still gotta have one.
It's not my era either, but I can sure respect it.
Just
one,
they have 4 Pensy numbers, Barry.
What's that?
They have 4 Pensy numbers. Just one?
Don't be telling me that, Mike. Don't be telling me that.
They have 4 numbers, dude.
Thank God it's out of my era. Now, if they had 4 numbers and they were like GP9s, yeah.
BL2s?
No BL2s. No BL2s. Only you like that ugly locomotive.
That is a weird locomotive. BL2 is a weird locomotive.
Mike's got a few of them. Don't know why. He really likes them, though. Ah. Look at Bill. So that's why he was the man at the New York City Transportation Authority. Only ran the red once and never got caught.
That's funny. That was his official title at the New York Transit Authority was Da Man.
Da Man.
Yeah, Bill Graham, Da Man on his name badge.
What? He now publicly admitted he violated a red signal.
Uh-oh.
Oh my gosh.
For shame, Bill, for shame. Bill.
What's the statute of limitations on that? I think retirement gets you out of that anyway.
Yeah, retirement gets you out of it. And nobody was hurt. Nobody got caught. So we know
Besides,
that.
his recollection's not good, seeing as he's senile.
He's got a disclaimer.
So I think we've covered a good basic of what signals are all about, some various kinds of signals. The very most basic of signals, like we said, is a 3-aspect system, which is what a lot of basic signal hardware is designed to emulate. From Newcastle, on a branch line with a lift bridge, would you signal it? Most absolutely. You would want to signal. You would want to signal the lift bridge, Newcastle, for sure.
Well, there's actually several interesting places on a model layout that you would signal that are not prototypical conditions, like entering and exiting staging yards. That is not exactly a prototypical condition, but signal them when you can't see them. I think of using signals on the model just like the prototype. If you can't see it, signal it.
Yeah, now this is going a little off the topic of perp dev here, but where Chris said that he did virtual signaling in JMRI.
That's
Mike
awesome.
Mike and I attended a clinic at the Valley Forge Railroad Prototype Modelers meet, and it was Bob Buckaloo who did the Quaker Valley signaling tutorial and CTC tutorial for the JMRI website, and he showed how he did a completely virtual signal system, and it was rather interesting. What he did is he set up web control panels for use with JMRI, and he put at his control points, he put a photograph of the signal icons on the physical signal bridge. He didn't have any physical heads, but he put a virtual icon of the signal on the actual physical bridge he took a photograph of, and made that a web page that you could display. And he had links going from each page to the next one. As you went down the control points on your travel, you could click to the next control point and see what the signal ahead was, and it was all controlled by the CTC board in JMRI. No detection, no physical signals whatsoever. It was all manually controlled signals. But if you had your smartphone or tablet and you pulled up the next control point, there was your signal to follow. His whole plan was that he would run his railroad with a video camera on like a car in front of his locomotive, and he would operate from the SD40 cab in his garage using a Pi Engineering AAR control stand replica. And he would have the video from the train on the layout projected on a screen in front of the full-size cab so that he could play real trains. We got to go back there. We got to go over there to see that one time, Mike. You know that?
Yeah, we do. We'll do. I'll have to see if I can scam a way in.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we could.
Oh,
He's
cool.
got a good website that shows all that too.
Yeah,
Google Bob Buckley.
Yeah, that's a great tutorial on signaling in general, as well as how to build CTC control panels prototypically to make it all function the way you would. Because typically you can set it up so you just click on the levers and it does stuff, but real railroads would click each lever to set a route, and it would initiate till you hit the send code button. So you can mimic all that in JMRI when you do it as well, and that's things we'll be looking into down the road to show everybody how to do it. And Bill, it's not, they can't touch me now, it's, can't touch this, okay? Wow.
Every time.
Hammer time, brother. All right, let's see here. So we got Mr. Mike Slater. Let's see what he's got. It is FY Pensy color position light were all a single color bulb. B&O in Chicago and Alton had different color bulbs on the color position lights. That is why the CSX chart had colored bulbs on the CPS chart. Yes, he's absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the NW, so in my era, 1950, the NW used all yellow. They didn't go to they're just position light signals. They didn't go to color position light till 54.
Yes. So a lot of what we saw in that CSX chart is because, like you said, various influences of the railroads now in their territory. Because if you were in the Pensy territory, you probably had standard position lights. But if you were down the old B&O territory, you would have, or the NW, you would have color position lights there. Now, eventually, some of those technologies wound their way throughout the system as signals are replaced and such. But the one thing about position lights that nobody ever really mentions, the reason they're designed that way is because they replaced semaphores. So you'll note that the stop aspect is horizontal lights or a horizontal arm on a semaphore. The medium approach is a diagonal series of lights with a diagonal arm on a semaphore, and the clear is a vertical series of lights with a vertical semaphore arm. So they were meant to say if you couldn't determine the lights ever lit, you can at least see the physical position to give you a better indication really quickly of what the aspect is presenting to you.
And you can be colorblind and still read them. And if one of the bulbs burned out, you could still read it. Because they didn't have LED. You know, bulbs burn out.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So, yeah, JD mentioned here that Hawk's layout was in the January issue of the EMAG, so I'll have to go back and take a look at that and see what we can do for him. So. All right, folks, I think we're going to wind up an early night tonight. We've kind of covered enough of what I wanted to cover tonight. And the next show probably won't be for 2 more months because I want to go maybe meet and talk to Mike about starting some of our craftsman stuff on here, and that way give everybody time to they don't every month all they see is tech show from us. So we want to change it up a little bit. So the next episode we will be discussing the layout plan that we're going to use, be it Hawks or one that we conjure up, or pieces of a plan to demonstrate different aspects. And it'd be nice to take an actual complete layout that has all the necessary elements and plan a signal system with everybody here. So we'll work on that for you folks next time, and that way we can present this is why and how you would signal your model railroad. Then we can get into developing the software side with JMRI, and then how to implement that in hardware and make it work. And that's where you get into the fun part, having lights on your layout. So, appreciate everybody hanging out and watching tonight. Thank you to all my friends on the panel here, Mike and Chris and Andy. Always great input from everybody. So, and don't everybody forget, the YouTube Model Builders is your great free resource for everything model railroading. We have our free e-magazine, the weekly hangouts on every other Tuesday and every Thursday here. And then we also have the monthly live show. As I said earlier, this is our 2nd year with the live show. So it's been a fun ride, and we're still heading down the track. So, folks, enjoy what's left of your evening, and we will see you soon. All right, good night, everybody.
Good night.